Hello, and this is Raphael Freeman from Running Our Typesetting, and today we're going to take a bit of a deep dive into quote marks around Hebrew text when that Hebrew text is interspersed into an English document. So here is my English document, and those of you who are more eagle-eyed might notice it's not actually in the English language. And I actually want to start by looking at this paragraph here. Now, those of you who understand Latin will understand that we're now quoting this bit of French text over here. Okay, that's complete nonsense, but that's pretty obvious. When we typeset something like this and we want to quote this French text, then we're going to probably do something like this in terms of making it look understandable. Okay, this is how we create a quote. But what happens if we've got a small amount of text to quote? So let's go over to the right-hand page and let's just pretend that this text here is French. Actually, let's make it more fun. Let's copy some French text here. Okay, and let's pretend we're going to quote it over here. Okay, how are we going to let the reader know that this text here, this French text, is being quoted? Okay, well, the way that we do it is we put it in quote marks. Now, here's a question for you. Which quote marks do we use in French? Okay, now, if this was a French book, okay, then in French, this is how we do French quote marks. That's a lie. That's also a lie. And that's a lie too. But we do it something like that, sorry. We get there eventually, okay. This is how we do French quote marks in French, but if the text around it is in English, that's not quite right, is it? Because if we're just speaking, if I'm just using, like I'm speaking to my friend, okay, and I say, as they say in French, let's say that's what I'm going to say, then I would say, as they say in French in English. So really, our quote marks here should be English quote marks. It's actually interesting that each language has different kind of quote marks. So those are American quote marks. In British, we actually use a single quote. If we change this text to German, okay, in German, it's worth having a look at this part of it. You'll see the quote marks go up and down like this, okay. And French, we've already seen it uses the guillemets. But just for completion, in British we use single quote marks. Now, if we have a quote within a quote, right? So within the text, as we know, if you have double quotes on the outside, then a quote within a quote is a single quote within a double quote. And in UK, it's the opposite. We have single quotes on the outside, a double quote on the inside. Okay, so that's how we deal with quotes. So the quote we see here follows the language that surrounds the quote, but the actual quote itself. So we don't do quote marks in French here. We don't do French quote marks. This was German text. We wouldn't do German quote marks. We do the same language. What happens in Hebrew? In Hebrew, this is actually deserved of a very long video in itself. I'm not going to do that. In Hebrew, we have something called the Gershaim and the Geresh. The Gershaim is used for an acronym. So let's say we have an acronym of the most famous one is a report, a din v'cheshbon, which is a duach. It's usually mispronounced as a doch. That's an acronym. If you're going to say giveret, and this symbol here, this is called a Gershaim. And in fact, you can actually see it in InDesign. You can insert special ME character. You see Gershaim and Geresh that actually have these words. So this is a Geresh. This is to truncate a word. Also, it's used in other situations like chat to say it's not sat, it's chat. But the Gershaim for again, long video to explain all this. But we also do use the Geresh and the Gershaim as quote marks. Why? Well, that another video. But take my word for it, right? Now, different fonts will do different things with the Gershheim. So this font here is Master Font's version of Frank Grill. Master Font's Frank Grill is, in my opinion, the most legible version of Frank Grill out there. If I want to change the font, I'm going to change it to a font by font bit, just for fun. Let's use font bits. You know what? Let's use Hadassah. It's actually kind of a nice font. So if you notice Hadassah, you'll see that the Garish and the Gershheim are they're more curved. Let's zoom in, right? So they're styled that way, whereas Master Font, they are slightly curved. They are angled. They're not straight quotes. They're not typewriter quotes. But they're not as curved as you can see with let's say Hadassah. Let's take another typeface, and I'm spending a bit of time just talking about this. It'll become very clear in a moment. So here's another font, as you can see, more stylized. That I want to try and take something that looks a little bit more like I'd say it looks like okay, so I don't want to here's another font, another example. Okay, so in this particular font, the Garish and Gershheim, I wouldn't say they're more like Frank Grill's of Master Font. Oops, just lost everything. But they're definitely each font has its own style in terms of quote marks. If I jump back to English, okay, so this font is Arno. If I were to change the font to Minion, and I'm going to zoom in onto the text here, if I were to make the font Minion, which is quite a different font in many ways. Let me just make sure we get the right version of the font, otherwise it won't look very good. Okay, still very much a curly quote, right? Curly quote. So this is, okay, so that's Arno, that's Minion. Even if I were to use Times New Roman, right? Okay, very curly quote, right? Very much a curly quote. If I were to go into something like Helvetica, right? Just a Helvetica condensed. Okay, still there's that curly quote. Okay, all right. Now, let's deal with what we really come to deal with. How do we deal with Hebrew? Okay, how do we deal with Hebrew within English? And this is where it gets very, very confusing. So if I now have if we're going to take a block of Hebrew text, okay, I don't think I've got anything here. Let's just find some Hebrew text. Let's jump onto the internet and find some Hebrew text. Here, I think this site can do it. I had it before. Generate some Hebrew text. Okay, that's not Hebrew. That does not look Hebrew to me. It was Hebrew before. Okay, now we're in Hebrew again. So let's grab just some text. Okay. And let's put this into Adobe InDesign. Okay, so I'm going to so obviously if the text has been put here, okay, as Hebrew text, all right, then as its own quote, there is no need for quote marks at the beginning. The same way in English you don't put quote marks in the beginning. But let's say I want to just quote this one sentence. Okay, so here. Okay, now this is actually very interesting, okay? And then you'll see why it's interesting in a moment, and then let's just continue some text afterwards. Let's just take this whole paragraph here and plonk it over here. And obviously we want the Hebrew to be right to left, otherwise it's going to be very annoying. The question is, how do I put quote marks here, okay? And this is something that I dealt with a very large publication very recently, and it was very, very confusing. Okay, and it's very confusing because I have actually a sentence that goes over 2 lines. If I wanted to write tavnit ktav, whatever that means, I mean, I know what it means, but it doesn't make any sense here, right? Over here. That is a different situation to here. And the reason why it's different is because this is going over 2 lines. Okay, so this is saying, okay, probably more useful if I got some real Hebrew text. So what I've done is I've taken the beginning of the Bible, because I think this is a recognizable sentence. So if I take this bit over here, and I say this is these two words here, which is in Hebrew, Vayhi or, and there was light. So which quote marks do I do around them? Do I do Hebrew quote marks, or do I do English quote marks? And we've established in our very first video, not very first video, sorry, the beginning of the video, that when we have French, we're not going to do French quotation marks. So here what we have to do is we have to do English quotation marks. So let's actually put them in English, and it would actually help that in English font, so that I can actually read it. So what happens when you make videos? They never quite work. So let's do that again. I managed to put a patach in there. Well done. So let's go into English, and I'm going to write English quotation marks. I'm purposely adding extra space around, and that's again the wrong quotation mark. There we go. Boom. Oh, that's very wrong. There we go. Okay, took 3 goes. Okay, and this is how, these are the quotation marks that would be here. So what we've done is we've said Vayhi or, okay, and we've quoted Vayhi or. And the reason why we've quoted like this is because in the Bible, there are no quote marks around Vayhi or. If the text I was quoting was Hebrew text, and actually it had quotation marks on the quote. So let's go down to this block of text here. So let's say this text is pretty nonsensical. So let's say in this text here, of course now it's doing it in I don't know what language. So let's pretend that the quote here is al-lashon hanemanim, okay? So hanemanim maleh, okay, and actually in Hebrew they do the quote marks before the period or full stop, okay. So if I was quoting this bit over here, then I should use Hebrew quote marks. But I'm not quoting that. I'm quoting Vayhi or maybe I'm quoting Tevat Polanit, right? Let's put that over here, right? So I'm quoting from this text down below, so I need to use English quotation marks. So let's now deal with the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Okay, that is this text here. This is the first word. And notice which direction it's going. Bereshit, bara Elokim, et hashmayim ve'et haaretz. It's going on the next line. Where do we do the quote? Okay, where the quote marks go. And we actually have a bit of a problem here with this full stop as well, because this full stop is actually the end of the sentence. So this full stop should actually be on the left. So let's put that on the left. And every time I do something here, it doesn't do what I want it to do. I'm not quite sure why. Okay, so there we go. Put it on the left. So we've got a bit of a strange thing here, because now we've got this weirdness going on. But let's make it even more weird. If I want to put this quote, I have to now use an English quote. Okay, and then what will happen is the English quote mark is on the left of the text. And then I put the final quote mark goes over here. Probably better to do it in the same font as the Rex. And this is the correct, yet very weird way of quoting a sentence in Hebrew. Okay, because the quote marks have to be in the English language. If you notice, when we've got 2 words, or it could even be more words, in other words, if I got rid of this random word here, which I don't know what it means, okay, then this looks okay. It looks perfectly fine. But the moment it goes over 2 lines, it looks very weird. And it's going to go over 2 lines. You're going to have a situation in Hebrew, in an English document, where you have a line of Hebrew text that is more than a line, okay, and it's going to go over 2 lines, and then you can get this weirdness here. So what do? Well, honestly, there isn't a lot you can do, unfortunately. This is just the way it is. Now, some people request to put that quote mark over here, okay, right? And it kind of feels better that way, but it's wrong, because this quote mark is an English quote mark. And after we've said in English, dolupta tiothenia doloptus, comma, then the quote mark needs to still be in the same direction. So that solution is not really a solution, it's actually quite wrong. And my recommendation is that when you're typesetting, you've got this kind of a scenario where you need to quote Hebrew text. And a lot of religious books have this as well, and certainly academic books have this the whole time. My suggestion is actually not to use quote marks at all. It is pretty obvious that this is a different language. It's a different character set. It's a different font. Another solution, by the way, I should have actually mentioned before continuing, is say, well, why don't we just use Hebrew quote marks, right? Because then we solve the problem, right? So I can actually hopefully switch that quite quickly. But this is also wrong, because this will imply that in the original text, these quote marks appear, and they don't. There are no quote marks at the beginning of the Bible. I checked. So the best solution is to actually get rid of the quote marks altogether, and that's my personal preference. If anyone asks my opinion, which people don't. And you have two, at this point you have two choices. You could either just leave it as is, and since you're in English and all of a sudden you're quoting Hebrew, if your Hebrew is good enough to understand this, and you know this is a quote from the Bible, you know this is a quote from the Bible. Okay, it's a different language. I think the fact that we have a different font and it's going right to left is enough of an indicator to the reader to understand that this is actually not part of the main text, and it's being quoted. Now, in some books, Hebrew is interspersed in the English as actually part of the main text, which I personally do not like. I think it is, I think it's ambiguous, particularly have this situation. But if you have that situation, if you have a book where Hebrew is being used in the English text as part of the English text, you're just switching between languages, and we do this in the English language, we use words like cul-de-sac, which is a French word. We don't pronounce it in French. We don't say cul-de-sac. We say cul-de-sac. And we might, there's some words that we might use in English like a priori, and we might put the Latin words and we might italicize them. But I think here, if you're going to use words in English, like English words in the Hebrew text, so you might say in the beginning, and I'm just using a text that you might have, you might say there's a particular term here called it's a kal v'chomer. It's a term that's used in a lot of religious text. So you might use that within the text, but this is not a quote, but this is, and you want to distinguish this as a quote. Then a solution is, which is not an amazing solution, but it's better than using quote marks, I think, is to use a dash, and then the reader understands that you're now quoting it. So I hope this little video, it's quite a long video, nearly 20 minutes long, helps. Then we get stuck, of course, I'm saying this helps, and then of course I'm realizing we're still left with this rather odd full stop here. I personally don't really have a good answer for the full stop in this particular scenario. I would be kind of tempted to ignore the full stop and make it an English full stop. So I would keep this as Hebrew, and even though in the original text there is a full stop, actually strictly speaking in Hebrew, in this particular case, the way that we end a sentence in the Bible is to use this symbol here, which in Hebrew is known as a sof pasuk. So in this particular case here, I would actually put a sof pasuk. It looks a bit like a colon, but it's not. And then I'll put a full stop here to end the English sentence. And that's how I would deal with this particular thing. So as I started to say before I remember to deal with that little that weirdness over there, I hope this video has helped to understand a little bit about the challenges of its typesetting Hebrew when it's interspersed within English, and to get away from the confusion between English quote marks. This is an English quote mark, actually it's not, it's an English inch mark, but English quote marks, curly quotes, typography quotes, whatever you want to call them, 66s and 99s as we learned them in school, and using the Hebrew Gershaim, which is a very different character, and also dealing with knowing when to use left to right and right to left. I think this is one of those videos where there might be an awful lot of comments and questions afterwards, and if you post below, I'll be very happy to answer. And I hope this clarifies to a certain extent certain challenges. There's a particular book that, as I say, I spent many hours fixing, changing, because the author wanted it to appear in a certain way, and it wasn't actually the way it's supposed to appear in terms of how we typeset left to right and right to left. Thank you for watching. Looking forward to your comments below. This was Raphael Freeman from Running Our Typesetting.